I have put that chair through some considerable abuse, both at BioBlitz and not. I actually broke the front tire in half at Black Mesa, and bouncing off some of those rocks, the front wheel finally just gave up the ghost and was like, nope, that was epic.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. I am Priscilla Crawford, the co-coordinator of BioBlitz Oklahoma and a conservation biologist with the Oklahoma Biological Survey. I co-host this podcast with Angelina Stancampiano, Oklahoma State Park senior naturalist. This podcast is an extension of our BioBlitz Oklahoma events. Now we can celebrate Oklahoma's biodiversity with you all year round. In this Meet the Expert episode, I chat with our BioBlitz expert, Chris Davis. Chris and I talk about how amazing mosses are and what we love most about BioBlitz, and how her super rugged wheelchair allows her to explore nature and have a fun BioBlitz experience.
My name is Chris Davis. I am a professor at Northern Oklahoma College. In my day job, I'm a member of the Agriculture and Biological Sciences Division. I teach general biology and medical terminology, and for the last couple of semesters, I've been teaching remotely because I have an extremely compromised immune system. When I'm on campus, which I very much look forward to being able to get back out doing soon, I also teach anatomy and physiology labs. Not really a whole lot to do with moss and liverworts and things like that there, but I'm also a PhD student in the Research, Evaluation, Measurement, and Statistics program at OSU, as well as a Master's in Public Health student. My PhD work focuses on how people become attached to cemeteries and how damage to or destruction of cemeteries during disasters, particularly floods, affects individual and community recovery from disaster. And my public health research focuses on the long-term public health impacts, cause of death patterns in the years following the Tulsa Race Massacre.
Wow, those are some serious topics. So when you say like how people are attached to cemeteries, do you mean emotionally attached?
Yes, and for the longest time, I would get people that would come up to me and say, well, gosh, they're already dead, who cares? And my answer to that is, okay, imagine if Arlington got destroyed tomorrow. And almost invariably people flinch. And so I tell them that reaction right there.
Yeah.
Now imagine it, instead of being a national cemetery, imagine instead it's your family's graves. So on top of having perhaps lost your house, or even having a number of your family members who've lost their homes, now in a lot of cases, when we're talking about cemetery destruction, we're talking not only about the cemetery being flooded, we're talking about bodies being unearthed and washing away.
Now, does this have a geographic component? Are you looking like mostly along the coast, or?
It is mostly coastal, but not entirely. One of the largest disinterment events, and that's the term for what happens when bodies are unearthed, actually happened in Missouri in 1993. It was a case of river flooding.
Wow, that's not a topic that I had ever really considered as being traumatic, but it makes sense once you explain it to us.
It also means that I encounter quite a lot of moss when I'm doing field work. I mean, seriously, there are a lot more dead people on this planet than there are living people.
Yeah.
We tend to memorialize the dead in a variety of ways, depending on our geography and our culture, and sometimes things like religious factors and things along those lines. And over time, nature just kind of takes over in a variety of ways, but one of those ways that I find myself looking at quite a lot are things like the mosses and the lichen as well. Even though that's not my area of expertise for biology, I do spend quite a little bit of time hanging out with the lichen as well when I'm down doing cemetery field work.
So that's why you're on the Meet the Expert podcast, is because you are our BioBlitz moss expert. I'm excited to have another plant expert on the podcast. My recollection of how you became our moss expert, or our expert in bryology, is that you attended a BioBlitz with your family and you asked me if anybody was doing specifically doing inventories for mosses or non-vascular plants, and I said no, not really. All of our botanists either focused on flowering plants, or we have Sheila Strawn who does our lichens. And so you asked if you could do it, and I said, of course, we would love to have an expert. And so I'm super thankful that you approached me during this. Do you remember which BioBlitz that was?
Oh gosh, I was trying to think about that before we met up today, and it's been what, about 4 years ago?
Oh, at least. I would think it might have been 5 or 6. You came out to Black Mesa.
Yes.
Which was 2017, I think. You had already established your expertise with us by that year. So how did you find out about BioBlitz? You came with your family, right?
Yes. Craig and Leah Buchanan are family members of mine, and they invited me and invited my kids along. And so we all came together, and my kids just loved being outside and getting to run around and do things. Our first BioBlitz to actually attend was at Foss.
Oh, Foss. That was the kind of cold, gray, windy.
Yes.
That was probably our most miserable conditions.
It was pretty chilly. It was remarkably chilly. My kids had a blast, though.
Oh, good.
It was a good time. And I mean, we've obviously kept coming back, so miserable conditions didn't put us off. But I remember the BioBlitz that I asked you about, doing inventory of bryophyte species. I remember just seeing this little pile of moss on the table.
Yes.
That people, I think, kept bringing either to the lichen experts, assuming they're lichen and they're not, or bringing to the vascular plant folks, assuming, hey, look, I brought plants and they're non-vascular. So these mosses just wound up in this little heap on the end of the table.
Yeah, people like to collect them. I think even though they might not necessarily be super into plants, people love mosses just because they're kind of cute. They're little. They have cute little structures. They make those nice little rounded mounds. Yeah, people like to collect them and bring them into BioBlitz. Although we are trying to convince people that if you're not an expert, just take pictures, and that generally can help us instead of collecting them from the wild. Okay, so you threw out several terms there that we should probably make sure that the audience members understand. We said bryophytes, we said mosses, and we said non-vascular plants.
Yeah.
Do you want to cover what we mean as biologists?
Generally speaking, the non-vascular plants, and more specifically the bryophytes, don't have a lot going on structurally. They're very simple, they're very primitive. They don't really have true roots. They don't have the tissues in them that carry water down from the roots up to the leaves like, say, flowers and trees do. So that's the vascular tissue. So they don't have that tissue, which is what makes them non-vascular plants. It also means they're very short.
Right, because they can't transport very far.
Right. By nature, they have to be small. They have to be short and very compact. I tell my students always groan, even though I teach general bio. When I get to the bryophyte section of our chapter on plants, I always wax a little poetic about mosses and
good
being the underdogs of the plant world that everybody sees but nobody notices.
Yep.
Because they're kind of everywhere. And they're incredibly diverse, but most people just assume, oh, hey, it's that fuzzy green stuff, and don't really look further. But we have dozens of native species. Mosses are the types of non-vascular plants that people most often associate with a non-vascular plant. They're the ones that make the little mounds and are fuzzy. There are other types of non-vascular plants like the liverworts and the hornworts. They tend to grow much more flatly along the ground. They aren't as fuzzy.
Right, and those could be confused with the lichens.
Yes, because they can look kind of curly on the edges.
So why mosses? What got you interested in mosses in particular?
I have a soft spot for underdogs, and I'm a total introvert. It also seemed like a gap that needed to be filled, which I kind of dig.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's all kind of how I roll, so everything just clicked. I do really enjoy mosses, but it was sort of accidental. I think I could have just as easily pursued any number of other things. My bachelor's degree is in English.
Good.
Could have gone a lot of different paths. I wanted to be a biologist when I was very, very small, so I kind of took the long way. But
I started out my undergraduate career as a literature major, and at least I figured it out before I graduated that I did not want to write papers about Charles Dickens.
my bachelor's degree, at least, is in English. Part of that is that I really struggled in science. I also really struggled in mathematics, and I always tell on myself in class because I came to college really kind of hating science and really hating math. And now I'm a biology professor pursuing a PhD in what amounts to applied statistics. So never say never. I do have dyslexia and dysgraphia and dyscalculia, which means that navigating some of those things it took me longer to get there.
Yeah, I could do a whole podcast about how I disagree with how science and math are taught in the middle school and high school. But I digress.
I suspect we're on a similar page there. One of the things that I really love about BioBlitz and about what I'm able to do with BioBlitz is that I really enjoy being able to take those things that seem complicated or seem like they're just these things that are for people with highfalutin fancy degrees and all kinds of IQ points and everything else. Like there's some ivory tower notion behind what it is that we do. And I don't think there has to be. Anybody can do biology.
I like your description of wanting to kind of study the underdog, because it seems like a lot of what I refer to as our amateur experts, people whose like paid job isn't to do this biology. Often they are the experts in those things that are the underdogs that have been kind of dismissed by the academics. Like I mentioned, Zach, he's our moth guy now. It was just kind of serendipity for him too. He switched on his porch light during the spring BioBlitz and noticed all these crazy species coming to his porch light in the middle of Norman, realized that there was a huge gap in the inventory for moths and that he could learn about this and fill that gap. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for people who maybe didn't do well in a traditional science setting to take on, a group of organisms that people have ignored and become an expert on their own if they like to learn independently like that.
Absolutely. I tell my students all the time that on syllabus day, that somebody in the room, and I never ask them to self-identify, but somebody in the room at that moment thinks that science is hard. And that if they've come to me with this notion that science is hard, I'm sorry, but they're living a lie. They use the scientific method every single day. You're in Norman, we're in Stillwater. We have streets near campus. I imagine Norman's the same way. That if you manage to cross and not get run over by some crazy driver, you've used the scientific method successfully. You've based it on previous knowledge. You've made a hypothesis. I mean, I'm telling you, every time I cross one of those streets, I feel like I'm doing an experiment.
Right.
You get to the other side, you have results. Hey, we're, adding that to the data. Like, that's all it is.
Yeah, or cooking, or like any number of things you do day to day.
Don't eat the fuzzy ramen noodles. You're good at the scientific method. And so, one thing I would really do is encourage people to pursue that, and that expertise is no less than anything else.
Yeah, just because you're not memorizing a bunch of facts that are in a textbook doesn't mean that you're not becoming an expert in doing science or a scientific topic.
It's been really cool for me, and I really love being able to share it with my students. One of the quirks about moss is that, not everything that we call moss is actually moss.
Right.
Which gets even more confusing. The Irish moss that you can buy at like the hardware store, it's very cute, little tiny fuzzy potted plant, adorable, but not actually moss. It's actually algae. Spanish moss, which we don't have a ton of around here, but if you go down south a little bit, it's everywhere hanging off trees. It's a flowering plant. How we use the term moss is really interesting. Spanish moss was actually named because of people insulting one another.
Oh, yeah? What's that story?
When the Spanish came into the southeastern part of the United States, and particularly into Louisiana, which is where I do a lot of my cemetery research, the Spaniards made fun of the locals' beards. And so they called the scraggly stuff hanging off the trees Acadian moss, because they were saying, oh, hey, we can grow more righteous beards than these local people can. Well, the locals said, we and this plant have been here way longer than all y'all. It is Spanish moss because our beards are better than yours. And it stuck. And so we have this flowering plant that we call moss that isn't moss, but is named because some people were insulting each other's facial hair. But it's so very human.
Well, yep. And it's surprisingly relevant in this hipster beard age, too.
I know, you see somebody with Spanish moss looking beard, you can go, I know that's not a moss. That is a flowering plant.
I just finished up a project where I was doing aquatic plant surveys at Oklahoma lakes. I would go to boat ramps to do these plant surveys, and people would see you with the clipboard and different things that I would carry with me, and they'd ask me what I was up to, and I'd mention that I was looking for aquatic invasive plants, and they'd be like, oh yeah, all that pond moss, it's really clogging up our boats. And none of them were mosses.
Yeah, it's funny, and I don't know of another plant term that is so woven into our language like that. Think about it. If you talk about a tree, it's a tree.
Yeah, people have a good concept of what a tree is and should be.
In general, when people talk about flowers, like the structure, they kind of have a pretty good concept of that. Now, of course, there are some things that are flowers that a lot of people don't think about, like the little flowers that happen on Spanish mosses.
Or even grasses flower, and people don't recognize those necessarily as the flowers.
Right. But, the term moss is just kind of all over the place across multiple taxa in terms of what we use for common names in places that are not technically moss, which is really fascinating. Okay, that's the English major in me talking.
Yeah.
But it's really fascinating how common to our experience mosses actually are. That term just occurs over and over all over the place, even if it's not scientifically a moss.
It's kind of a catchphrase for anything that's kind of small and small leaves and kind of low to the ground. And like you said, mosses are everywhere. And, sometimes they occur in, really kind of pristine habitats, and you see giant mounds of moss in these like lush forests. But then you find moss growing on a concrete sidewalk. They are some of those pioneer species that come in right after a disturbance.
That one is an interesting one for me because on a personal level, one of the things that is fascinating, sometimes frustrating, depends on the day, is the built environment and navigating the built environment. We have things like sidewalks where, particularly if the sidewalk is a little iffy in places, you can start to see where mosses have started to take hold.
Yeah, any place that is kind of not quite level or broken up a little bit. And that's also where we'll get the lichens and some of those other non-vascular things starting to take hold in the kind of a new built environment. The sidewalk is kind of mimicking the bare rock. So you had that cool story about Spanish moss and the terminology. Do you have any other fun facts or myths that you would like to bust about mosses for us?
I don't know if I have any fun myths. I will say one of my most fun interactions with moss is taking videos of moss back to my students, because when we do moss ID, one of the things that we do is we spray water on them to see how they react. And because I think so many people have this notion that moss is just this tiny, furry, fuzzy stuff that just kind of sits there, it actually reacts frequently very, very quickly. So I will use my cell phone to take video through my digital microscope. It's been very interesting to see how my students react to watching something that typically they wouldn't have thought could respond to anything at all. We say that responding to the environment is one of the characteristics of living things. Yeah, whatever. But actually seeing it happen in something that isn't time lapse is super cool.
Oh, yeah. Right there in front of them.
Yeah.
Well, and you bring that microscope video setup to BioBlitz.
Yes.
That's super cool because not only are you showing how the mosses are reacting, because they dry out pretty quickly when you like put them under the lights, then you spray it with water and then you can see it happening. And I know I've seen our citizen scientists gather around and watch this. But then, in addition to the coolness of the mosses, you start to see a whole community of organisms within those leaves. And you have contributed to the invertebrate number, the invertebrate inventory for us, because you have seen like mites and I'm not sure. I can't remember everything you were able to see within the mosses. Seeing people watch your demonstration of the kind of the community within the moss and seeing people getting excited about organisms that they had never thought about before they came to BioBlitz. I mean, people who come to BioBlitz are definitely nature lovers. They love the outdoors. They're already convinced of that, but maybe they love mammals or birds. But when they see these videos that you take of the mosses and all the little organisms in there, I love seeing these people get excited about things that they never even thought about before. How many of them have stopped to think about the mites that live in that thin layer of water on those leaves?
That is hands down one of my favorite parts of BioBlitz. I think in general, as humans, we struggle to conceptualize the very small and the very old. Lichens do a really interesting job of demonstrating the very old, because some of those can live an incredibly, staggeringly long time. But mosses, people don't think about this little teensy community that may have a whole host of organisms in it, because when they've passed moss, they just see the soft green fuzzy stuff.
Yeah, I think it opens up a whole nother world to people.
That's easily my favorite part of BioBlitz.
Good. It's definitely one of my favorite things is just showing people things about their world that they hadn't thought of before. We're not converting anybody at BioBlitz to become nature lovers. They're already there because of that, but expanding their view of nature and how the world works is definitely one of my favorite things about hosting BioBlitz and giving people this opportunity.
I also really love that the equipment that I'm using is stuff that anybody can get.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, talk a little bit about that, the equipment you use.
Okay, obviously I have my laptop computer. My laptop isn't anything particularly snazzy.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of your average grad student laptop, but the microscopes that I use, I literally got for $20 a piece.
Oh, yeah, that's really reasonable.
That's within reach for so many people. And even 5 or 10 years ago, we would not be talking about a $20 price tag.
How quickly technology has improved over the past 10 years. It's really helped us at BioBlitz, like using the iNaturalist app. That technology is fantastic now, even compared to like 3 years ago. I remember, in fact, trying to use it at Foss Lake, that BioBlitz we were trying to convince people to use the app or to use the web interface, and it was a disaster. Because the Wi-Fi was bad out there. Yeah, there's just been so many advances, and it's made so many more things accessible to people because they're cheaper or they're even free.
Yeah, that's, I think, been the biggest change over the years. And it's been super cool because these people come and they get all excited about getting to see moss and all these little things. And I can tell people, yeah, this is where I got this. This is how much it was. And particularly parents seem to just light up that, oh my gosh, this is something that I can do with my kids. Or teachers who we all know, particularly at the K-12 level, work on incredibly limited budgets.
Oh, yeah.
All of a sudden, oh my gosh, this is a thing, like I could get one of these for my classroom.
Yeah, and you don't have to limit it to mosses either, even though you could spend years learning about mosses. You can look at all sorts of other things too. So you come to BioBlitz and you do the moss identification for us. And you mentioned that you look at mosses when you do some of your cemetery work. Do you go on other kind of mossy field trips to just learn about mosses or collect them?
I do. A lot of them, admittedly, are cemetery related because right now.
Well, it's good to kill. I'm not going to use that metaphor. It's good to multitask.
Right. I also will sometimes stop places along the way. Right now, with the pandemic being what it is and with my immune system being what it is, oddly, cemeteries are about the safest place for me. I'm much safer in the company of the dead than I am in the company of the living, which says a lot of very peculiar things. But I frequent very old cemeteries that nobody has visited for many years. Bonus if they're way out in the boonies. If I go somewhere like that, I'm able to look at both some of the features of the cemetery itself, but also I'm able to look at some of the ecological succession that is taking place if the cemetery is inactive. So if there are no longer burials that are taking place there.
Right, and nobody's mowing the whole area regularly.
Right.
There are a huge number of species of moss to keep track of, but you do go on these trips to do surveys or inventories or just to go see cool mosses. Do you keep data on the mosses you see, like a list of species? If you do, like, how do you keep that information for yourself?
I actually keep it on Excel. I use a spreadsheet.
About how many species of mosses do you think are in Oklahoma?
Oh gosh.
Any guess?
If I had to guess, I'd say low 60s.
Oh, okay. But then you are traveling to cemeteries all over the Southeast, it sounds like.
Yes. When we're not in a pandemic, I do a fair amount of travel, particularly in southern Louisiana, and they do have species there that we do not have here.
I would think so, because it's very different down there.
Yes. Yes. The climate is very, very different, particularly along the coast.
Yeah. So what are some of the environmental factors that determine different moss species that you find? Is it precipitation, relative humidity, substrate?
All of those things do matter. Moisture in general matters a lot because since mosses don't have that vascular tissue to carry moisture from roots to leaves, they really have to have a pretty damp environment, both in terms of precipitation and relative humidity, to really thrive, which is one of the reasons I was surprised that we found as many species as we did at the Black Mesa BioBlitz.
Oh, yeah.
But I think the couple of weeks before, they'd had some really pretty staggering rains, which had led to both the mosses and the fungi kind of taking off in that area.
Yeah, the timing for that BioBlitz turned out to be really good weather-wise because, like you said, there had been a fair amount of rain in the season leading up to it. So some of our BioBlitz have been a little like brown and crunchy. And I was a little concerned for Black Mesa being brown and crunchy in general at what was going to happen by the time we got there in October. Yeah, they had a fair amount of fall, like late summer precipitation that allowed the vegetation to stay relatively green, and things were still blooming and looking relatively lush for the Panhandle. Participating in BioBlitz and doing your field work has become more challenging for you since I've known you. You now rely on a wheelchair to get around regularly. How have you been able to continue your outdoor activities, given some of the mobility limitations you currently have?
That one has been a not a linear path, I will
Yeah.
say. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It is a condition, it's a genetic condition, so I was born with it. And we've always known that a wheelchair would be at least a mostly full-time part of my life. The big risk to me is falling, particularly on rough terrain.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, BioBlitz, no matter where we are, is not noted for pristine terrain.
Right. Yeah. We like it when it's rough, usually at BioBlitz.
Right. And there were a couple of years there where I basically wasn't able to get out in the field
Mm-hmm.
and do my own collecting. And admittedly, that was a couple of pretty rough years for me. There were still lots of species and I still had a good time and we were still able to do good work, but it was tough. And I honestly thought I was never going to do field work again, either for BioBlitz or for my cemetery work. I just thought, that's it, field work is done for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to have to give very precise instructions and send people out to bring me back heaven only knows what.
I can't even imagine how emotionally difficult that would be for a person who loves the outdoors.
It was tough. While I am not shy at all, I am very deeply introverted, like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a lot of extra peopling steps.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was just exhausting.
And that can be really stressful, having to deal with so many more people.
People who were being, quite frankly, amazing to me, but while I was trying to sort of learn how to live in my own body and live in a world that is not made of pristine terrain.
Mm-hmm.
It was tricky for a couple of years, and not just at BioBlitz. It was kind of generally tricky for a couple of years. One of the big things that changed for me is that I had a pretty major upgrade in mobility equipment and have an all-terrain wheelchair
Mm-hmm.
that is built out of mountain bike parts.
Oh, wow.
So all of the moving parts are off-the-shelf mountain bike parts. So they are somewhat tougher than your average wheelchair part. They are also somewhat easier to replace when, not if, I manage to do something crazy and break it.
Yeah, because you can just go to a bike shop.
Yeah, I can go into a local bike shop. They ooh and ah over the nifty wheelchair. And then suddenly I'm an athlete. I'm not a person with a disability.
Right.
Which was a major shift. People were seeing the chair, but for different reasons. It was just, oh my gosh, that's really super cool engineering. And to be fair, it is. It's amazing engineering. The company that built my chair is a company called Grit. They started out, their group of engineers from MIT. They have a number of versions of the chair for different countries, and they use locally available mountain bike parts.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So the versions that are available overseas are different than the versions that are available here, and they started making them for individuals with mobility challenges in developing countries where there are no roads.
Yeah.
I have put that chair through some considerable abuse, both at BioBlitz and not. I actually broke the front tire in half at Black Mesa. That was epic. We actually went to hike at the Black Mesa Trail.
Okay, you have to tell us that story.
Yes. So I did not make the last little bit up to the summit.
Yeah, so the High Point Trail. Did you do the switchbacks?
We got to the last little bit. So we went from the gate all the way up to that last little bit to the summit.
Oh.
It was pretty intense. I had an older version. The chair that I use has 3 wheels instead of 4. It's a lever and chain drive chair, so it has quite a little bit more mechanical advantage. And bouncing off some of those rocks, the front wheel finally just gave up the ghost and was like, nope. We made it down kind of precariously, and the rule at the company that makes the chair is kind of tell us a really good story and we'll send you a replacement part. And so I sent them videos from BioBlitz and, of this hike and said, hey, I did 8 miles in this thing on this terrain. And so they mailed me a new wheel.
Oh, excellent.
It was something else, but I got to be out in the field again. I haven't done anything quite that adventurous again at BioBlitz. I kind of like ran it out of my system a little bit, I think.
Well, and now you know you can do it too. That's part of the hurdle is like, well, if I want to, I could do it.
But the BioBlitz at Osage Hills, I did a fair amount of hiking. I actually grew up in Bartlesville, so I spent a lot of summers at Osage Hills when I was a kid.
Yeah, so that was your local state park.
Getting to get back out there and hike trails that I thought, quite frankly, I would never hike again. And getting to do field work was kind of a lot in its own way. It was just a blast. Now, one of the things that is a challenge at BioBlitz is, it's one of those things that is not the fault of BioBlitz, is that, I don't know if you've noticed, but state park buildings are kind of old.
Yes. Well, and I'm hoping that with their new parking pass program, they're getting an influx of new funds and they are starting to do some significant renovations. And of course, because they're a state entity, they're going to be required to make sure that anything that they renovate or build new should be accessible for many more people.
Right.
But yes, right now a lot of their infrastructure is very old and has like 2 little steps to get into a building, or it has really narrow doorways which restrict people's coming into a building.
It's often kind of a challenge, and I always tell people that accessible doesn't mean friendly.
Yes, right.
Those two things are not synonymous. And I've been known to pack extra wheelchairs with me when I think people are going to be difficult about accessibility. If I think I'm going to get oh yeah, it's totally accessible, why can't you figure it out? And just hand somebody a wheelchair and say, okay, go for it.
Oh, yeah, I participated in this study. Oh, back when I first graduated college, one of my friends worked for a law firm at the time, and they were considering taking on this class action lawsuit for noncompliance with the ADA. And we were hired to go test out some of these buildings that people were claiming were accessible, available to people in wheelchairs or people with walkers or people who couldn't use their hands very dexterously. And we had a variety of things that we went and checked. We measured like stalls and bathrooms, and we had to manipulate the locks on doors. And we found that lots of people say their facilities are accessible, but like you said, we're definitely not friendly. They did very squeak by some of those requirements, but it was still not easy to use.
Yeah, there's definitely a learning curve to using things, even something so as simple as having signs indicating which way an accessible bathroom is. So you don't have to go and find someone to talk to them about your bodily functions every time.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Something that simple makes a world of difference.
Oh, yeah. A lot of these older buildings are retrofitted. And like you said, they can't retrofit it in the most efficient way. So, yeah, finding that bathroom or having to go 2/3 around a building to finally find the ramp that allows you to enter the building is difficult and a challenge. This year with BioBlitz, I'm trying to focus on how to make things more welcoming for everybody, gender, socioeconomic, race, making sure that BioBlitz is a diverse, equitable, inclusive, welcoming community, and that we all feel welcome, and that we're celebrating not only the ecological diversity that we have, but also our human diversity of all of our participants, both our experts and our citizen scientists. I have not made an effort in BioBlitz to make sure that we are able to include everybody. And nature activities and outdoor recreation is generally designed for people who don't have disabilities, and designing things for people who have challenges is kind of a second thought. And I'm trying to make it a much more upfront process for BioBlitz this year, because I want everybody to have a great BioBlitz experience and have it be accessible to a wide diversity of people. Through BioBlitz, I mean, some of those things are related to the facilities that need improvement, but are there any other suggestions that you would have for BioBlitz or other kind of similar nature activities that would be more welcoming to people with mobility difficulties?
One thing that I would suggest, it's a suggestion that's difficult, is recommending that you just ask people, what would help you participate fully in this activity?
Okay. Would that be something that you think we would ask during the registration process?
Or even send something out beforehand. The reason I hesitate is because sometimes, particularly, and I speak from the standpoint of somebody with mobility challenges, so I cannot speak for the entire planet of people with disabilities or the entire diversity of humanity by any stretch.
Of course.
If I tell you, hey, I really need to be able to get through doors, which is true, but you can't make a state park's doors wider between now and BioBlitz.
Right, but we could choose locations and facilities that accommodate a wider range of people.
That is true. Asking is part of it. Listening to it and acting on it are just as important.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be prepared to do the second and third step if you do the first.
Right.
And I think you have to understand that there may be things that are out of your power immediately.
Oh, for sure. I know that I'm not going to be able to fix all of the problems for people. And even to the best of my abilities, there will be some people that we will still not be able to accommodate, I'm sure. But I think that's a great suggestion, that we should kind of open it up to people, like, what's limiting your participation and what can we do to make BioBlitz more accessible for you?
And that way, if you phrase it that way, it's not just about disability.
Right.
It could be about any number of other things that somebody might feel they need this one thing to help them participate more fully. And it may be something that all the brainstorming sessions in the world would never come up with, because it's all about listening to the needs of your community.
Yeah, you don't want to make wide changes when it's not going to help anybody.
Right.
So, kind of similarly, do you also have any suggestions for people who might have similar mobility difficulties on how to enjoy the outdoors or how to participate in BioBlitz? Because some people may be intimidated. They're like, well, I'm in a wheelchair. They don't want me there, or it'll be too difficult. Do you have any encouragement or suggestions for those people?
I would say yes, they do want you there.
We do, for sure.
I will admit to having had those thoughts myself, though. I will own that. I think that's a natural part for a lot of people of adjusting to living in a body that functions differently than the way it's always functioned, particularly if you're someone who's really fiercely independent, and all of a sudden you may have to ask people for help or deal with people who really aggressively want to help. And
yeah,
I like people, but I'm really introverty and like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of peopling and I don't even know what I need yet because I'm new to this and it's just this whole cycle of stress. I think that admission on my part is important. I have not been immune to that. That first couple of years was rough. Like it was hard.
Yeah.
There were days that I was like, I'm just not even going to sign up.
But then I probably sent you another email hassling you like, hey, Mosses, we need.
I know. I know. And so I was like, no, I got to sign up because nobody's going to count the moss. Got to do this. Okay.
We'll just have that sad pile on a table at the base camp.
I know. And so I think that that's kind of a two-parter. It is not that if you're feeling that way, it's okay to feel that way, but yes, that people want you there. That said, it is sometimes hard to be at BioBlitz with a mobility challenge. Even though, I have equipment that helps make it a lot easier, it's still challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many walls I've crashed into or curbs I've hopped off or potted plants I've had close encounters with, trees or what have you, because I'm not noted for my grace. I would encourage people to try, and I would encourage people to communicate with you about what they need and to just start the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about communication, and I really appreciate you taking this time to talk to me about the topic because a lot of people find it uncomfortable talking about these differences in human experience, especially when you feel like you might be the privileged person talking to the person who is less privileged or has a difficulty. So I appreciate that you're helping me better understand your experience and helping me to improve the BioBlitz experience for everybody, people who can easily walk or people who may have to be in a wheelchair for their experience.
I will say I'm really glad for the experience, though.
Good. Well, we definitely love having you. That I'm so glad that your wheelchair is such a rugged piece of equipment, and I'm going to look up that company and put it in the show notes so anybody who is an outdoor person who is having troubles and wants to look for equipment that could maybe help them access the outdoors better. That sounds like a great company. And they're not paying me to say this.
They also just came out that they have a kids version now of the chair, which was super exciting.
Oh, that is good. Oh, yeah, because kids, they need to be outside.
Yeah, so that was super cool news. That's something that they've been trying to work on a version that would kind of grow with a kid.
Oh, uh-huh.
Insurance won't cover these chairs.
Yeah, because they're specialty?
Yes, because for insurance, being in the outdoors isn't a medical necessity. They classify it as a luxury. Which is all kinds of frustrating, and we could have a whole other podcast on quality of life and normalcy.
And how important the outdoors is for people's mental health.
Right, and like sense of self. When I thought I was never going to do field work again, I lost a whole piece of my sense of self.
Oh, yeah.
And it was pretty devastating. And I balked at buying one of these chairs because I'm pretty frugal. For 2 years. I put it off for 2 years. The company does have some grant plans and some financing plans and some things like that where they do try to make them more accessible to more people. For anyone who looks at the show notes, goes and looks at them and goes, oh my gosh, my insurance doesn't cover that. They're just phenomenal folks to work with. I went to a abilities summit in California and forgot my axles because I'm that kind of scatterbrained.
Oh no, so you had like all the parts but you couldn't keep the wheels on.
Yes, I actually had the wrong axles, so we limped me through airports with axles that were a 1/4 inch too short.
Oops.
That was a level of terrifying that I never want to experience ever again in my life.
So you probably thought your wheels were going to fall off the whole time.
Oh, they did a couple of times. It was terrifying. It was so bad. It was so bad. They actually overnighted me a new set of axles from Boston to California just to make sure I was taken care of.
That's amazing customer service. And I guess it shows like how important the person is to them and their business.
Yeah, they've taken great care of me.
Well, okay, we're going to move on to some less serious questions.
Absolutely.
We have our quick question round. These are some fun questions I like to ask the guests at the end of our discussion and chat. So what is one of your most memorable days in the field? Although I guess you probably just told us about the Black Mesa adventure. So that might be one of your most memorable days in the field.
That day was something else. And I admit, I loved sending photos of my broken, and I actually tore my wheel in half. Totally epic, because I thought I would never have a story like that ever again. It was so cool that I was out doing something so rough and tumble, I managed to destroy one of the wheels on my wheelchair.
That is great.
I really love those moments that we talked about where people get excited about something that they've looked at but never seen before, like moss. Because when people leave there after they've been so excited, and a lot of times like kids will go get their parents or parents will go get their kids, and suddenly I've got, this like group of people around me like really jazzed about moss and mites and spray bottles and $20 digital microscopes, and it's really interesting and really deeply human. And I think it's really cool. And when they leave there, they're never going to look at that tiny fuzzy stuff the same way quite ever again.
No, they'll remember.
That's one of the things I love the most, because it makes that accessible and deeply human to anybody. That connection makes moss and bryophytes important to everybody who comes up and looks over my shoulder.
They'll never look at moss the same way again. That'll be a really lasting, memorable experience. Okay, question number 2. Now, you've grown up in Oklahoma. You said that you grew up in Bartlesville, and Osage Hills was your kind of local state park to go to. But what is your favorite place in Oklahoma to explore outside now?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I have one. I tell my students that when I was in high school, I was one of these students that it was going to go to OSU to get in-state tuition, and then boom, I was out of the state. I was going to be gone.
Uh-huh.
I was one of those kids. We can see where I'm still sitting, but I can't imagine being anywhere else. And one of the major reasons that I stayed is because of the diversity of biomes here.
Yep.
I can visit almost any ecoregion I want on the planet, with a very small handful of exceptions, within a day's drive from where I'm sitting right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few places in the world that you can say that. So if I'm somebody who really loves biodiversity and really hates spending money on gas, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Oklahoma is fantastic. I had no idea when I first moved here or contemplated coming here for graduate school how diverse it was.
It's just really super cool. I do admit that I really love the Sand Creek Trail at Osage Hills.
Oh, yeah. Osage Hills is one of my favorite parks, and I enjoyed that hike as well.
But Oklahoma, all in all, is pretty nifty.
Well, so you said that there are very few places that you would like to go outside of Oklahoma or farther than a day's drive, but do you have anything on your natural history bucket list?
Oh, yeah. I think seeing some of the ecoregions that are not here in Oklahoma would be super cool, both literally and figuratively, because, we don't have some of the super cold ones here. Spending some more time up north would be really cool. I have traveled pretty extensively in the United States. I do think I would very much like to see Alaska. I've never been up there. I also think that going and spending some time in Australia would be really, really cool, because, the ecosystem is so much different.
Yeah, Australia is on several people's bucket lists that I've asked this question. Because I think it's just because it's like the opposite end of the world from us. So it must be amazing.
Yeah.
You said you've traveled extensively. What has been the most exciting organism you have seen in the wild in your travels?
Most exciting? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we of course visited Yellowstone, and seeing bear and moose in the wild is always very, very cool. You don't really have a sense of scale for moose until you've actually like seen one.
Uh-huh. They are big.
Oh my goodness, they're huge. I still really like the underdogs. I really do. One of my favorite places is Lake Martin in Breaux Bridge, Louisiana. When I go down to Louisiana, I tend to base out of Breaux Bridge because it's far enough north that if things are flooding, it's less likely to be affected. But it's also central enough that I can get to either the westernmost parishes or the easternmost parishes within a day's drive. I will admit I have a very, very soft spot for swamps. And I happen to really, really love cypress and swamp daisies, which for a lot of people may not be super exciting. But to me, if I am in the company of those organisms, Louisiana has sort of become home away from home for me. If I am in the company of those organisms, it's kind of like I'm home.
Yeah, I mean, I asked this question about the most exciting organism, and I think about how I would answer it. And like you said, I'm most excited when I see something that's comforting like that. Now, during these cold spells, I really enjoy watching juncos in my backyard. They're super common in the winter. Sometimes I get really excited about seeing these things in my backyard.
Right. Yeah. And it's something that not a lot of people think about being exciting, but I think they're pretty cool.
Okay, next question. What advice would you give to someone wanting to become an expert in mosses? I assume that a lot of your kind of taxonomy and like learning to identify them, that was mostly self-taught.
Yes. Yeah. It's been mostly self-taught, lots of field guides.
Oh, do you have any suggestions for field guides for mosses? Because I don't know if I have any.
It depends on where we are in Oklahoma. Again, because Oklahoma is so diverse in terms of ecoregions. So the collection of field guides that I have is a smattering of field guides from across the country. One of the ones that I use pretty extensively is An Introduction to Bryophytes by Vanderpoorten. I occasionally use Bryophyte Biology by Goffinet.
I think I'll need to get a couple of these for our BioBlitz field guide collection.
I would pick up something that has lots of color photos, which is something that helped me because a lot of the terminology, even though I do have a biology background, is different.
Oh, it's super specialized, isn't it?
Yeah, it's different terminology, even for somebody with a biology background, and even for somebody with a reasonably decent grasp on plants, even though I'm far from a plant specialist.
Well, having been a person who studied plants, I actually looked up before our conversation. I'm like, do they actually call the things on mosses leaves? And so even I looked up, like, what is the right term to use for those little structures on mosses? And yes, they do call them leaves, but they don't call them stems. They call them axils.
Right.
And then of course you have all the reproductive structures, and they have all their special names. So yeah, I can understand why the terminology would be intimidating.
For me, starting with things that had color photos was very, very helpful because it gave me a way I could start eliminating things and then start narrowing, and then I could start associating, oh, hey, this terminology means this. And that helped me a lot. I'm a very, very visual learner, so having that helped me a lot. I think that anybody, though, who wants to become an expert in any group of taxa, talk to some people and do it. Go hang out with somebody. I mean, heck, if somebody wants to come learn about mosses, like, come hang out with me. I'll talk your ear off about the green fuzzy stuff.
Yeah, and that's been a suggestion that a lot of people have given, is find people that are already experts and hang out with them and learn from them, because learning from a book can be difficult and not as inspiring as being with somebody who is super passionate about that group of organisms.
Definitely. There's just not a lot of bryophyte experts out there.
No, that's true.
You were joking about president of the Bryophyte Society having 4 members, but not quite inaccurate.
Right. Okay, last question. What is the next thing you want to learn about? You're in the middle of, or at the end of your PhD, so maybe you don't have a lot of time to devote to extraneous learning, but is there anything out there that you're interested in?
Actually, sort of on the learning bucket list is rebuilding a car engine.
Oh, wow. So do you have experience doing stuff like that?
Very little. I have just enough experience to be quite dangerous.
Do you have a particular car that you want to do?
Yes, my husband has a Dodge Charger, and we are looking at undertaking rebuilding its engine. It's not something that has to be done immediately, but if we were to take it to a shop, it would be prohibitively expensive, and so, why not learn how to do it?
Yeah. So how old is the Dodge Charger?
It's only a 2006, but it's
okay.
got lots of miles on it. My very first car was a 1970 Chevelle, so I'm a little bit of a gearhead.
Okay.
Not something people would necessarily pick out about me, just looking at me. So it's something that I've always enjoyed. It's just on my list of things. I just have no idea what I'm doing.
That's super cool. This is one of my favorite questions because it often brings out a part of somebody's personality that you wouldn't necessarily know about. We've spent the past hour and a half talking about mosses and our interest in kind of biology and education and the outdoors.
Right.
People have all sorts of cool things going on. I love the fact that you are interested in rebuilding a car engine. Yeah, I'm not sure what the next thing I want to learn about. I keep teasing my husband that, say I trip and fall and sprain my ankle and I have to sit in the house for several weeks or something, that I'm going to learn to play the banjo. We can have our own little bluegrass band. My daughter plays the cello, and I was like, I bet you could turn that into a bluegrass instrument. Well, thank you, Chris, for taking the time today. This has been great getting to know you. You are one of the BioBlitz people, our experts, that I knew the least before having this conversation with you. Most of the people I work with professionally, they're in our department or they're at a university that I work with regularly. And coming into this conversation, I was a little nervous. I'm like, I don't know Chris that well. I hope everything goes well. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and your background and why mosses. I really look forward to the next time we can have BioBlitz in person together. Hope that it's going to be this October at Roman Nose. That's our plan.
Sounds great.
Good luck finishing up your PhD. That'll be exciting, and I look forward to working with you in the future during BioBlitz and learning more about mosses during our events. As I said, I didn't know Chris well before our conversation, but I really enjoy getting to know her and hearing about her cemetery research, her love of mosses and all the underdog species, and how a well-engineered wheelchair has helped her continue her fieldwork and get outdoors. The link to the company that makes her chair is in the show notes. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen so that you are notified when we upload more episodes. In our next episode, Angelina and I will be talking about how to participate in our spring BioBlitz. We'll use iNaturalist, eBird, and Budburst. We talk about the activity schedule, the observation challenges, and how you can earn prizes just for participating. So get ready for the spring BioBlitz, happening during the entire month of April. Details will also be on our website. This podcast is a project of Oklahoma State Parks and BioBlitz Oklahoma, an outreach program of the Oklahoma Biological Survey at the University of Oklahoma. We hope that you have time to step outside today and explore Oklahoma's amazing biodiversity. Remember, you can find biodiversity right outside your own door.